The white world returned to her vision as the aisles of dead trees lay before her. She was at the back of the house, a path she remembered from when she visited before. Just ahead of her she could see a path, and followed it, she could easily locate the Crusaders' clubhouse. Though she wasn't really willing to search the forest at the moment, not with the thought that she might be attacked once more by that pony from the vortex again. Her mind wandered slowly from her, just wanting to relax for a moment while it recuperated, when a loud sound of wood cracking came to her ears. Her body instantly froze, and her head turned in the direction she had heard it. A second loud crack echoed over the woods, and she honed her vision in one spot. A third loud crack, and she had found the source. In the distance, among the forest, creating a fourth cracking sound by assaulting one of the trees, an orange blur was moving about. Her heart felt like it had stopped. She focused harder on that orange blur than she'd ever focused in her life. It moved. It sauntered slowly from one tree to the next, before raising its legs and striking hard at its base, followed by a loud crack that echoed through the trees. No monsters were around it. No fog was playing tricks on her eyes. That sound was unmistakable. Her legs started moving before her mind even gave the order. Her body was moving in full sprint, not even for a moment doubting the destination. This wasn't that other world where the world played tricks on walking from one room to the next. This wasn't some delusion or dream or mirror world. The blur was real. She was drawing closer to it, a shape she knew, a shape she was familiar with. "Applejack!" Twilight yelled out, not even realizing she had taken a moment to draw in such a huge breath. Her eyes darted forward and saw the orange pony stopped. It became clearer as she drew. The tears in her eyes were slowly coming back. There was an orange pony looking back at her, one looking bewildered and confused, before realization dawned upon the pony's face. "Twilight, was all Applejack managed to say before she was unceremoniously tackled by a purple unicorn. The two of them landed in the ashen forest, four legs wrapped tightly around the other. The two of them just stayed like that, just hugging tight for a moment that felt like it lasted forever. "Twilight, is that really you? You're alive. Oh, thanks Celestia, you're alive." Applejack squeezed a little tighter in her hug. "I've been looking everywhere for you and the others. I don't know what's going on in this crazy place." "I've been looking for you too, Applejack." Twilight smiled, finally pulling back from the hug, visible tears at the edges of her eyes once more. She took Applejack's hoof and helped her to sit up. "Though I'm really just as confused as you are about what's going on here. I woke up in the library, and Ponyville was just like this." "That's what happened to me, too," Applejack said, adjusting her hat, her face growing serious. "Granny Smith was one who woke me, saying she was gathering the family downstairs. At first I thought it was the middle of the night, but it didn't take long to realize the windows were boarded shut. Apple Bloom was getting scared, but Big Mac was able to calm her down. We couldn't seem to escape no matter how hard we pounded on the wood, covering the windows or the walls. We eventually found a key that let us out, but then we, saw this." Applejack waved a hoof towards the fog and the dead trees. "And I knew something wasn't right. So I told him to stay put while I went and found you and the others." Applejack flicked her hat in annoyance. "A fat load of good that did, though. Ponyville was no better off, and I was just running in circles trying to find some pony. Eventually did, though. Did find this." She pulled off her hat and reached inside before pulling out an aged piece of paper and handing it to Twilight. Taking it carefully, Twilight unrolled it, seeing that it was the messy black writing on it, in the form of a riddle. $1, $2, $3, 4. Dead leaves in hollow trees. 3 are gone for you to find. A key we've hidden to be found. "I've left a bad taste in my mouth, too," Applejack said, seeing the look that appeared on Twilight's face. She replaced the hat on her head and continued. "I immediately rushed back to the barn, but everyone was missing. If they had left to search, they would have left a note. If they'd seen something only Big Mac would have left. Something happened to my family, Twi. And the only clue I have is that note. Saying stuff about a key and hollow trees. The only thing I could do is see if there's a hollow tree in the orchard that has a key. Applejack turned her head to the veritable forest that would normally be covering the hills, if not for the fog. But there are just so many. I don't know if I could even find it. I see, Twilight said, swallowing a knot that had formed in her throat. It's been the same story everywhere I've been. Missing ponies, strange riddles and puzzles, monsters hiding in the shadows. Monsters? Applejack asked, interrupting Twilight's train of thought. I haven't seen any monsters. Are you telling me there's monsters here too? What? Twilight asked, confusion drawing on her face. They've been all over Ponyville, Applejack. These zombie-like ponies wearing ancient royal armor, carrying weapons. Or the decaying dragon that's watching over the skies. Or ones that eat books. Ones that have scythes for legs. Giant leeches that eat the remains of other ponies. To get here, I ran from a dragon and some orb-like monstrosity. And you've seen none of that? Bewilderment, confusion, anger, hesitation, jealousy. Twilight couldn't but hoof on what kind of emotion she was feeling. But it was welling up inside of her. Twilight, there aren't any monsters in Ponyville. I've been there for hours. The town's empty. Are you feeling all right? It was as if the color had drained from Twilight's face. There was no way that Applejack had traveled through Ponyville for hours without having run into a single monsters. Spike had seen them as well. Rarity had seen them. Magus had. They still look like monsters to you. Her mind began to play back every memory of her sword tearing through the monsters that she had slain, remembering the feel of her hot blood on her flesh and hooves, the terror of them coming to kill her, only for her to have to come out on top. She could still see that blade tearing through their flesh. The only thing I saw in Ponyville was a hooded pony that talked like Sakura. Applejack murdered. You did? Twilight was able to snap out of her thoughts, looking at Applejack for something to cling to. Did she say anything? Yeah, she muttered something awful cryptic. Not that I knew a thing she was talking about. I had a hard time understanding that fancy riddle talk. Applejack shook her head in frustration. But you saw her, right? She spoke to you. And then just as quickly as she appeared, she disappeared, right? Twilight was grasping for a foundation. Yeah. How'd you know? Applejack asked, surprised. I've seen her too, AJ. I don't know what she is, but she seems to be following us around Ponyville. I don't know if she's one of the monstrosities or not, but she's proof that I'm not just seeing things. There are monsters out there. Spike and Magus have seen them too. I know I'm not hallucinating, Twilight said, reassuring herself more than anyone. The foundation on which she kept her sanity was shaking, constantly being knocked over and rebuilt, but she was going to keep it together, even if it ended up killing her. I believe you, Twi. I just haven't seen any myself. It's been quieter than a silent movie out there. Applejack adjusted her hat again, before looking over her shoulder at the dead trees around the farm once more. And I still need to find that key in one of them trees here. If it helps me find out what happened to my family, then I reckon I'll tear down each one of them if I have to. I understand, Applejack. But when I came to Sweet Apple Acres, I was chased by a huge monster, one I just barely got away from. It's not safe out here in the trees. We should regroup with Spike and Magus in the house. Together we can think of a better plan than just kicking at every tree here. I reckon that does make a bit of sense. Applejack sighed softly, flicking her hat once more. Just one question. Who's Magus? He's a pony I managed to find while searching for you guys. He's looking after Spike while I search. He's actually managed to find a way to make safe spots around town. Places where the monsters can't get in. We'll be safe in the house as long as he's there. That's a heck of a convenient pony you've run into town while it's like this, given the fact that I haven't run into any pony else for hours, and you just happen to find him with all these safe spots he can make? Doesn't that strike you as suspicious? Applejack raised an eyebrow curiously, obviously already thinking about their safety. Twilight bit her lip in thought. Even she couldn't deny the strange feeling Magus gave her whenever he talked. All of his words seemed to come out in a strange way. Not quite flat, but not quite emotive either. He put emphasis on words that didn't really need them, and he said things that might seem normal in an unusual manner. She couldn't get out of her head that he had said and done in the barn, how he had shown her that monster and just... I asked him to watch over Spike, and he did. He kept him safe, out of harm's way. Even if I don't fully trust him, he's at least kept his word. Spike's safe with him. I'm sure of that, at least. Twilight didn't sound completely assured, as if she was convincing herself just as much as Applejack. Well, all right then. Let's go meet him and see what we can think up, Applejack said, walking over to Twilight's side, before giving her a gentle nudge and smiling. And it's mighty good to see you again, Twi. Let's not get split up. Yeah, sounds good. Twilight smiled, glad to have the company again. She had been traveling alone for so long she'd almost forgotten what it's like to have a friend by her side. It was still too dangerous to have Spike traveling with her, but Applejack was a strong pony, probably the strongest she knew besides Big Mac. If a monster showed up, she could handle herself in a fight. The white ash covering their hooves as they walked, each step sinking at least half an inch into the covered ground. The barn was still in sight and wouldn't take longer than a minute to reach. Twilight scanned around her, looking for any sign of a creature that might be following them, but saw nothing. It seemed things were finally starting to look up for her, to start going in her favor. Perhaps she could finally get out of this hell. No more sirens, no more strange twisted worlds with rules of their own, no more being covered in blood and slicing down monsters. She'd find her friends, fix Ponyville, then curl up in front of the fireplace and have a warm cup of cocoa. Hey, Twi, did you hear that? Applejack asked, stopping in place to lift her head up a little. Twilight blinked in confusion, lifting her head as well, trying to hear what Applejack was talking about. At first she didn't hear anything, just the usual wind in the silent town, perhaps a tree creaking in the wind. But the sound in the distance started off low, just rumbling in the distance. Then it began to grow louder and louder, reaching over the tops of the trees. A sound Twilight recognized, one that made her heart drop in dread. Did some pony turn on a siren? Maybe there are other ponies out there. This could be a sign, Twilight. We should get to... Applejack, run to the barn. Now. Twilight interrupted Applejack with her demand. What? What's the sudden rush? Applejack raised an eyebrow, looking at Twilight in confusion. There's no time to question it, Twilight almost yelled. Just run! Run now! Twilight slammed her hoof against the ground. As she did, the siren reached its peak, and the world around them began to change. The barks of the tree began to chip away, bits and pieces floating up into the sky. The ground and ash began to float up into the air in chunks. The air was filling with the floating debris. Okay, y'all don't have to tell me twice, Applejack said, finally realizing the situation. Her legs sprung back, and she bolted forward, rushing straight for the barn. Twilight quickly followed after her, only just barely able to keep up with Applejack. The world was changing fast, the flying chips of the world growing denser with each passing second. The barn rushed closer to them, just seconds away. Applejack reached the back door first, grabbing it with her hoof and flinging it open. She sprung on her back legs straight through the door. Twilight was right behind her, ready to leap into the house for safety. But the moment Applejack's body hit the inside of the house, she cracked. Her entire body rippled with gray cracks as the color faded from her coat and hair, and her hooves touched the ground. She burst, shattering into gray ash, flying and falling where her body had once been. Twilight skidded to a halt as she stared in horror at what had happened to her friend, now just a pile of ash floating in the air, same as the changing world around her. The sirens blared loudly in her ears, and the doors to the barn slammed shut right before her. Her back legs gave way, and she sat down on the changing world, watching as the last bits of the odd world vanished. The siren in the distance faded away slowly, fog-riddled world now replaced. The sky was dark, spreading a dark haze that obscured vision from a distance. She no longer sat on earth and ash, but rather a solid steel platform. rusted red and stained with what looked like blood. The house that was once Applejack's home was now a twisted shack of metal and wires, looking more like a scrap yard of metal than a livable home. The trees around her looked to be covered in rotten skin, pulsing slowly in certain spots, as if blood pumped through them. You've called me back here," Twilight whispered to no one, pressing her hooves hard against the ground as she stared at it. "You've called me here again. Why?" She asked no one. I just want to go home." She squeezed her eyes shut, then pressed her foreleg and forehead against the metal door. Far away in the distance, a loud roar echoed quietly across the farm.